Many of the elements of Princess Diana's will are pretty standard, but the document does hold a few surprises, and what happened with it after her death is even more shocking. One of the most extraordinary things about Princess Diana's will is that we know what's in it in the first place. Most royals' wills stay private. For example, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh and husband of Queen Elizabeth II, died in 2021, just a few months shy of his 100th birthday. If you have been waiting with bated breath to learn how he distributed his wealth, you'll have to live to be even older than he was. According to the BBC, 5 months after he died, a court ruled that Philip's will would remain sealed for 90 years, and even then, people could only petition to make it public. It isn't guaranteed. The official stated reason is to protect the dignity and standing of Queen Elizabeth. Sir Andrew McFarlane, the most senior family court judge in the UK and the guardian of a safe containing 30 sealed wills of royals who have died, said, "Whilst there may be public curiosity as to the private arrangements that a member of the royal family may choose to make in their will, there is no true public interest in the public knowing this wholly private information." Diana apparently didn't fit in that category, though. According to the Associated Press, both the royal family and Diana's family, the Spencers, allowed her will to be made public because everyone was obsessing over every detail of her death. Before her marriage to now King Charles III, Diana worked as a kindergarten teacher and a part-time nanny. The nanny job paid the equivalent of $5 an hour. Her employer, Mary Robertson, told Inside Edition.
She would pick up toys, she would wash dishes.
Those gigs made her the first woman to hold down a paying job of any kind before marrying into the royal family. They also obviously didn't make her rich. Yet when she died, Diana's estate was worth £21 million, or about $31.5 million in 1997 dollars, according to the Latin Times. On top of that, she owned quite a trove of priceless jewelry and designer clothing. So where did she get all the cash? Quite simply, in her divorce settlement. When Charles and Diana finally got out of the marriage they both hated in 1996, the settlement wasn't officially announced, but the New York Times noted, London newspapers have reported that Diana is getting about $22.5 million in cash, as well as about $600,000 a year to maintain her private office. The large lump sum was apparently in place of any alimony. Diana also had to drop the Her Royal Highness title, which Charles is said to have insisted on out of spite. Princess Diana was known to have trouble trusting people, but the two people assigned to carry out her final wishes as executors of her will should have been the most trustworthy people she knew: her mother and sister, Frances Ruth Shane Kidd and Lady Elizabeth Sarah Lavinia McCorquodale, respectively. Yet these two women immediately went to court over the will, for reasons that are not really clear. According to Reader's Digest, they obtained a variation order that allowed them to make certain changes both to the requests laid out in Diana's will and the princess's letter of wishes, which was written 1 day later. In normal circumstances, the letter of wishes would be just as legally binding as the will. One thing that's clear is that Diana's mom and sister didn't take these actions to try to take all of Diana's money for themselves or anything like that. And though Diana wrote her will 3 years before her divorce from then Prince Charles, the legalities of the divorce didn't seem to have much of an effect on the will's contents. So, whatever the reason, the executors did alter the princess's very simple, straightforward wishes. Prince William was just 15 when his mother died. His grief was splashed across the front pages and broadcast on TV as he viewed the sea of flowers left in his mother's honor and walked behind her coffin at her funeral. In a different time, William would probably have inherited everything, since he was the oldest son and heir. But before Princess Diana's will was published, the Associated Press reported that rumors flew that it would be quite the opposite. Sources were saying that William's younger brother Harry might get most or all of their mother's estate, with the logic that Harry would have to make his own way in the world, while William would eventually receive huge amounts of money as king. In the end, though, it turned out she split their inheritance evenly. Originally, William and Harry were supposed to split 75% of Diana's estate, but when her mother and sister challenged the will, the brothers ended up with basically all of it. That said, a court also decided that they were not allowed to touch it until they each turned 30 rather than 25, as Diana originally stipulated. William received his half of the inheritance in 2012. Based on an estimate by The Telegraph about how much her estate would have grown with investments over the years, his part is thought to have come to about $16 million. Perhaps surprisingly, a big chunk of what was willed to William, as well as his brother Harry, ended up going to taxes. Prince Harry turned 30 in 2014, so that's when he inherited his half of his mother's estate. While he probably expected to live a life of royal luxury, even without that money, his inheritance ended up being more important than he might have guessed. Harry and his wife, Meghan Markle, whom he married in 2018, opted to step back from their duties as working royals in 2020, and they eventually moved to California. In Harry and Meghan's headline-making 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey, Harry said that he and Meghan had been cut off financially by his family, and that his inheritance was the only reason they could afford to leave.
I think she saw it coming. And I certainly felt her presence throughout this whole process.
William and Harry didn't just inherit money. They also own a lot of Diana's stuff as well. And shortly after she died, they each picked a meaningful piece of jewelry from her collection. William chose her Cartier watch, and Harry chose her huge sapphire and diamond engagement ring. If you know your royals, that might surprise you, since that ring has been on the finger of William's wife, Kate Middleton, since 2010. Vanity Fair reports that because William got engaged first, the two traded their keepsakes, and Meghan now wears the Cartier watch. At the time of her death, perhaps no one was closer to Princess Diana than her butler, Paul Burrell. She famously called him her rock, and The Telegraph reports that Burrell was the most senior trusted member of her staff, with duties that went far beyond that of mere butler. After Diana's fatal car accident, Burrell flew to Paris immediately, planning to stay by her hospital bed. Instead, he ended up doing an all-night vigil next to her coffin before her funeral. He was the only mourner who wasn't related to Diana allowed at her burial at her family's ancestral home of Althorpe. He was the one who cataloged all of her stuff. He said, "I knew I had to do it. Who else could? She was surrounded by the richest, the most educated, the most landed people in the country, and she chose me, a lorry driver's son from Derbyshire. She called me her rock, and I was there." Diana left very few direct bequests, but she couldn't forget her loyal butler. Burrell received $82,500 in Diana's will, according to the New York Times. Sadly, in the following decades, he would cash in pretty hard on his connection to Diana. He was even accused of stealing from her after she died, though he was acquitted of the charges. At the time of her death, Princess Diana was the godmother of a whopping 17 children. Having a royal as your child's godparent is quite the status symbol. Diana obviously cared about these kids, and she remembered all of them, outlining in her letter of wishes what she wanted them to inherit. She wrote, "I would like you to divide, at your discretion, my personal chattels between my sons and my godchildren. The division is to be 3/4 in value to my sons and 1/4 between my godchildren. It is estimated that the chattels, which is the legal term for stuff, divided among the godchildren would have been worth $160,000 per child. Unfortunately for them, the court case brought by Diana's mother and sister also changed this part of the will drastically. In the end, each godchild only got one item each, picked by the executors. Princess Diana was very well known for her charitable work. She seemed to really feel for the less fortunate she visited, like she cared about making a difference, not just doing the work for the photo op. So it's kind of weird that no charities are named in her will. There's nothing wrong with wanting to leave everything to your kids, but considering Princes William and Harry were never going to be poor, they didn't actually need the inheritance like most other people might. But for whatever reason, Diana did not single out any charities by name in her will, nor did she leave any of them any cash. They did get some money, but through a more complicated route. Reader's Digest notes that in her letter of wishes, Diana set up a discretionary fund. It was a relatively small amount, thought to be about £100,000 or $150,000. Over time, the investments in the fund would increase in value, and the charities would benefit from it, according to Trust and Will. That said, the fund was also made available to William and Harry, as well as their eventual wives, so it wasn't much to start with, and in theory, one of the sons could just clean it out. The organizations did, thankfully, get something that went towards only their coffers, reports CBS News, and could be quite lucrative: Diana's name and image rights. So at least she didn't forget her charities completely. Diana's mother and sister ended up as her executors by the time she died, but that wasn't what was in her will originally. Diana had named her private secretary, Patrick Jeffson, as executor. He resigned from his position very suddenly in 1996, and the will was modified to remove him as executor and add Lady Sarah McCorquodale. After Diana's death, Jeffson went on to write a book about his time working for her, Shadows of a Princess. The royal family was not happy. The Guardian reported that Prince William thought the book was worth commenting on in a press call, saying, "Of course, Harry and I are both quite upset about it, that our mother's trust has been betrayed and even now she is still being exploited." In 2021, Jeffson again went on the record about his relationship with Diana, although the timing was a bit suspect. Reporter Martin Bashir had just been found to have lied, forged documents, and manipulated Diana to score his infamous 1995 interview with her for the BBC's Panorama.
Do you really believe that a campaign was being waged against you?
Yes, I did, absolutely.
Jeffson wrote in the Daily Mail that Bashir had told Diana lies about him as well, and their trust was broken. When Jeffson found out she'd done the interview, he left her service. Princess Diana's will was a relatively short document, and even then, most of it is made up of obvious legalese, using 100 words to say what non-lawyers could intend. But there are still a few more interesting things you can glean from the full text. The first topic she gets out of the way, stated simply and on its own, is that she wanted to be buried. So that, at least, was done according to her final wishes. It's good to know that the elaborate funeral where she was transported in front of millions in her casket involved something she wanted. It's interesting to think about if her wishes would still have been honored if she chose some different disposition of her remains, like cremation. Since Diana had drawn up the will in 1993, 3 years before she and Charles officially divorced, it is written as if he is still her husband. One sentence would end up being necessary regardless. "Should I predecease my husband, he will consult with my mother with regard to the upbringing and education and welfare of our children." Hopefully, Charles acceded to her wishes on that.